Hello, my name is Caroline Stoner, and I'm here to tell you about the modern dynamic model of behavior change. Now, this is just a basic guide I made intended for the general community, so feel free to share with your family and friends. The modern dynamic model of behavior change is the most accurate theory of behavior change to date, and I'll tell you why. It's all based on the idea that human behavior is influenced by many different factors. So this includes interpersonal factors, community factors, as well as personal factors, behavioral factors, and environmental factors. Additionally, there are individual beliefs, social influence, and perceived control that play into this. But these factors all play off each other as well as influence one another on our daily basis, and that is the key. So in this model, there are some underlying concepts. Reciprocal determinism is the idea that behavior is controlled or determined by the individual through cognitive processes and by the environment through external social stimulus events. Essentially, reciprocal determinism explains that how we act is influenced by our environment, our individual characteristics, and our unique behavioral factors. In fact, all three of these factors influence one another. Humans are social beings, so this model also puts an emphasis on our social world. We are heavily influenced by the social forces that surround us, and, in the age of modern technology, we are able to expand our social networks beyond physical and geographic boundaries. Social influence is prominent as we are increasingly influenced by our virtual social worlds on the internet and on social media. This model also puts a central focus on the individual. While the modern dynamic model can be applied to anyone, this model stresses the importance of recognizing the individual factors that play into our decision-making and behavior choices. No two people are the same, and this model accounts for the unique characteristics, experiences, and histories that make us who we are. This also means the weight of each category of factors may differ from person to person. Intrapersonal factors refer to those existing or occurring within the self or within one's mind. Because every person is unique, the interpersonal factors can be quite varied for each person. Things like attitude, expectations, and emotions are all considered intrapersonal factors in this model. Interpersonal factors refer to those relating to relationships or communication between or among people. Our interactions with one another can both foster healthy behavior choices and promote unhealthy habits. From our social networks, we gain social support, and we are constantly influencing one another in our day-to-day interactions. The spread of knowledge within our social networks is also something to consider. Communication among people leads to the spread of information and ideas. This no doubt has a direct effect on individuals' behavior. Community factors refer to those existing within one's community. A community is a social unit with a commonality, such as religion, values, norms, customs, identity, or location. There are organizational and institutional factors that exist within this category, like access to healthcare clinics or higher education. Public policy factors also play a role in this category, since policy often guides community health. City planning accounts for walkability and the rate of urbanization. Natural resource regulations can determine the level of pollution that exists within a community. Public safety mandates such as seatbelt laws and smoking bans all directly affect the health of community members as well. Personal factors play an important role in this model. Our genetic makeup is like a roadmap for life, and many conditions of our present and future health are encoded in our DNA. Even if you do not know your genetic makeup, family histories can tell us a lot about ourselves. Families usually have much more in common than just DNA. Things like environment, lifestyle, and habits are often shared among family members. Similarly, risks for disease or illness run in families as well. Race and ethnicity can also be both biological and social determinants of our health. Cultural factors can influence our behavior, since different cultures have their own customs, values, principles, and ideologies. And age matters too. Behavior often changes as we get older, and people from one generation may behave differently than those from another generation. Socioeconomic status greatly influences our chosen behaviors as well. Where we stand on the socioeconomic ladder can determine our access to resources or the availability of those resources to us. And behavioral factors exert a strong influence on our chosen actions. Behaviors can be both health-enhancing and health-compromising. Good habits can promote one's health, whereas bad habits have the opposite effect. Recognizing our habits and routines can help us to understand our behaviors and predict future health outcomes. In order to obtain a behavioral skill, one must know the significance of the behavior and know how to perform the behavior. Coping mechanisms are an excellent example of behavioral skills that can take time to learn. The practice of behaviors is also an important factor to consider. The repetition or termination of certain behaviors can be both positive and negative. Additionally, reinforcements and punishments can also influence our behavioral practices. Environmental factors also directly influence human behavior. The built environment refers to the human-made environment that provides the setting for human activity. Things like access to resources and services and city infrastructure are all factors of our built environments. Occupational hazards exist in the built environment as well. Exposure to hazardous substances or unsafe working conditions affect our chosen health behaviors. The natural world can also affect our health behavior. Climate change and natural disasters influence both how we act as individuals and how we function as a community. Demographics, such as the size, structure, and distribution of communities, affect our chosen behaviors as well. Demographic variables have been shown to directly affect cognitive processes that ultimately influence our choices and actions. Individual beliefs greatly affect the way we behave. Knowledge is an underlying factor of our individual beliefs that influences the health choices we make. Knowledge, in this case, means understanding the health risks and benefits of different practices and the information necessary to perform a specific behavior. Knowledge is a precondition for change, so education and health literacy can help to determine how people behave. Behavior is also influenced by our perception of possible threats or benefits. The perceived threat to illness and the severity of disease can affect how we choose to live our lives. The potential positive benefits of behavior, similarly, can encourage us to take action and follow through with those behavioral choices. Social influence is a fundamental category in this model since our behaviors are heavily shaped by our social worlds. Observational learning is a large part of social influence. People learn by observing behaviors and consequences. Because of this, role models in our social worlds often set the tone for our chosen health behaviors. Normative beliefs are the cultural norms and beliefs about the social acceptability and perceived prevalence of a behavior. We often compare ourselves to our peers, and we use our perception of peer norms as a standard to compare our own behaviors. It is important to note that motivation to comply with social norms is influenced by both social and self-evaluative consequences. The term collective efficacy refers to the ability of members of a community to control the behavior of individuals and groups in that community. The concept of collective efficacy applies to situations where individuals do not have control over the social conditions or institutions that shape their lives. Social cohesion can spur groups to take action for a common good. And media is nothing to overlook as a large component of social influence as well. We are constantly bombarded with advertisements and marketing ploys that ultimately influence our chosen behaviors. Perceived control is the final category of the modern dynamic model of behavior change. Motivation is an important driver of behavior choices and behavioral change. Perceived importance can influence whether a person decides to take a certain action or not. Self-efficacy refers to an individual's belief in his or her capacity to execute certain actions. Self-efficacy regulates processes that either enhance or impede behaviors, and it is often driven by one's underlying level of self-confidence. Someone with a high level of self-efficacy is more likely to say things like, "I can," whereas someone with a low level of self-efficacy is more likely to say, "I can't." Perceived power over one's behavior choices is another influence on his or her decision-making. Perceived power contributes to a person's perceived behavioral control over the various factors and variables in his or her life. So, the modern dynamic model of behavior change rests on three main assumptions. Human behavior is shaped by the dynamic, reciprocal interaction of the unique variables and factors in an individual's life. These variables and factors are influenced by one another through the concept of reciprocal determinism. Social influence is important as we are becoming a more socially driven society. And finally, this model has a broad application, meaning it can be applied to everyone, but unique findings, because everyone is different. I hope you enjoyed this short presentation, and thank you very much.